Welcome to a new episode of the Creative Industry Insight podcast. I'm your host, Bobby. Today, we welcome editor Greg Finton, who joins us to talk about their work on I'm Chevy Chase and You're Not. Greg will talk us through the creative decisions made in the edit to tell Chevy's life story. Please be warned that there are heavy spoilers in this episode. Now let's jump into the conversation with Greg. Hi, Greg. Thank you for joining me today.
Hi, Rob. So great to be here. Do you like Rob or Robert or Bobby? What do you like?
Surprise me.
All right.
We're here to talk about I'm Chevy Chase and You're Not, which is recently aired in the UK on Sky Documentaries, but in the US on the CNN network, which is a funny thing to say because usually all these things then either end up on Netflix or Apple or Amazon. So it's like now CNN's getting on that action.
Yeah, well, they were quite involved in the documentary world up until a few years ago, and then I know that they sort of, folded their documentary division for a short time, and I'm really happy that they're back into the documentary world again. So we need more avenues, So
yeah, 100%. And how have you found the reaction and reception to the documentary?
I've been quite surprised by it. I was assuming we would be kind of a small documentary that not a lot of people would see or write about, and it's been pleasantly surprising to see how many how many people did review the film, how many people have seen it. The reaction to the film has been so strong. We're all just really, really happy about it.
Yeah, and I think as well, like it's one of those where it kind of sells itself with the subject matter because it's somebody like Chevy kind of does span over a number of different decades and also audience members. Like for me, he's mainly known for like Community, but then like you kind of watch him and then you go back, and I remember buying like the first series of SNL and watching that as well. You just see like such a big difference in it all.
Yeah, I mean, he's almost like a perfect documentary subject, right? Because he's had such a varied and long career. He's worked in so many different types of the industry, types of entertainment within the industry, and as his reputation is out ahead of him all the time, he's quite polarizing in a lot of ways.
Yeah, 100%. And I feel like the documentary does show that. It's a shame that I didn't feel like they could be a bit longer, because sometimes all of these things are becoming series, and then this is a sort of like an hour and a half, and I feel like we get a part of the real him, and then we kind of get the sort of not stage, the sort of camera style of him, but it would have been great to see a bit more of him like real life, where you kind of see him with signing autographs or going to pick up flowers and those sort of moments.
Yeah.
They kind of humanize him more, and you do feel like this, like, I don't know, you sort of see a different side to him in a way.
Yeah, I mean, those moments are certainly my favorite moments in the film, where we're seeing him in his home environment in the current day. Because it does humanize him, and you get to see, I love anytime we get to see people who we don't see in their natural environments. I love to see them in their natural environments more. So yeah, I did have, some of the cuts that were painful to make in the film were some of the more of the scenes where he is at home or with friends or with family, that we just didn't have the screen time for.
And I reckon as an editor, like, it's probably so difficult to take those moments out because you know that you only have a certain amount of time and you want to cover certain things, but then you kind of want to, I don't know, I guess with something like a documentary, it's very difficult because it's it's slightly different to sort of a narrative film where you have that script in front of you, but then if something doesn't work, you can kind of tweak it around or cut it and cut down. Whilst here, you're going through the motions of somebody's life. It's a lot, and it's kind of, I don't envy your position when you're going through it all.
But it's honestly what I love so much about documentary filmmaking myself is that, you know, we get to write the film as we're creating it, you know, as we're editing it. We really are writing it in the editing room, right? And the best documentaries I always find are the ones where the filmmakers allow the film to change as it evolves, and then they allow themselves to evolve with the film as far as how they're seeing it. So this film is no exception to that. You know, it certainly morphed and changed many times during the editing process.
Then how, as an editor, like when it's like morphing and changing, how do you keep on top of what you're doing and making sure that you're creating the best end product possible?
Well, every film is different, you know. Sometimes my act one is really strong, and I can build off of that, and I can let it sort of flow to where it seems to want to go into act two and into act three. Sometimes my act three is really strong, and I know what I'm building to, and then my challenges are more in the first couple of acts. You know, it's just always a matter of trying to keep the train on the tracks, which I think is crucial in documentary editing versus, say, narrative editing, which you talked about. When you have a script, it's easier to diverge from the tracks a little bit, to experiment a little more and stuff. And we certainly experiment a lot with documentary editing, but if we get too far off the tracks and too far afield, it can be hard to rein yourself back in. So, with this film, it was always, for me, it was always the exploration of, are we going to get to know this guy, this person who tells us right up front, that, look, I don't let anybody get to know me. I'm very sensitive. I'm very insecure. I put up walls. I put up guards. So that became, when I saw that clip, and he goes on to insult Marina in that same sentence, by telling her she's not smart enough to figure him out. So when I saw that clip, I was like, I think we have our open here, and we have our direction here, because that gives us the direction. Are we going to be able to figure this guy out? Are we going to be able to break down this wall? And is she going to be able to penetrate that?
And when you're going through that footage, because as an audience, when you see it, it's quite shocking, because it's not felt in a way that it's kind of said in a way to actually offend, and it's not a sort of playful tone. Then I don't feel like he's challenging Marina at that point. So, for example, like when you watch something like Pee-wee himself, when Paul Rubens is talking to the director, and then he's kind of going back and forth with them or to the camera itself, it feels like he's kind of challenging, and he's like, "Oh, should I be doing this? Should I not be doing this?" But for Chevy, it kind of feels slightly, I don't know, it just seems to be trying to be funny and insulting, but it doesn't work in a way, because I can imagine just a lot of, unfortunately, a lot of no laughs in the audience, people who are there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that Chevy ever says to himself, should I not be doing this? Which is another reason why he's such a great documentary subject, because he does not filter himself, and even though he tells you you're not going to be able to figure him out, you're not going to get to know him, he's constantly telling you all about himself and revealing himself too. So.
Yeah, and there's parts as well where I think it's interesting, is like the way that you've structured it is when he's talking about things and it cuts to his friends or moments of people in college and family members, and it's getting that information from him where he'll kind of say a tidbit and then a friend will sort of reveal more. And I didn't know about the music part side of him. So when you're hearing that, it is so fascinating. And the fact that he says as well, is like, I can't read music and I do it by sound, which again, incredible, because you know, there's people who probably study for years and decades, you know, reading music, and he's just there being like, yeah, I can just play it by this note and this sound.
I loved that moment so much, and that moment of discovery and him telling us that, because I didn't know about his musical background either before starting this. I didn't know a lot about Chevy, to be honest with you, before starting this, which I always love to start a film that way, not knowing a ton about the subject or the person that I'm making a film about. But when I saw that moment, it explained so much to me, because I think, yes, he doesn't read music. He plays by ear, and it's all instinct, and he's actually quite a good musician. I think that his acting and his career is very much that same way. I don't think that, like what his agent Mike Ovitz tells us at one point in the film, I don't think Chevy took his career quite as seriously as he should have, you know. And people tell us that, you know, he was very lazy. He didn't like to work too hard. Things came very easily to him, you know, and that's how he's lived his life, and that is how he shaped his whole acting career as well. It's just, I don't think he studied, you know, I don't think he studied acting really judiciously as the way, you know, say Robin Williams did, you know, the similar types of careers. Marina and I also made a film about Robin Williams, you know, years ago, and so the parallels were quite fascinating to contrast with this film.
Do you have ever the moments where, because you've looked at two comedians quite beloved in different ways, do you then look at it when you're editing to sort of not mimic the same way that you're telling the story, but try mold them in the same way? Or do you just look at them at two different subjects because everybody's so different, and there's so much more to take out of each person's story?
Yeah, I think it would have been a real disservice to the film if I tried to, you know, mimic the two films and see them as similar, you know. So I definitely tried to see Chevy different from anybody I've ever worked with before. You know, Robin Williams is a completely different character, though there are a lot of similarities, and I'm sure there are things that I took from how we cut. I also Poppy Doss edited the Robin Williams doc with me. Poppy is also my partner in life, as well as sometimes in work as well. And so, you know, she had her influence on that film as well, as whereas I did this film entirely by myself. But the similarities, I would say, between those two films is just how we're constantly trying to play with the what I call the roller coaster effect, right? So the high moments always followed by a lower moment, and then constantly dipping up and down, so that nothing ever flattens out too much or nothing's ever too high consistently, because that will flatten out as well. So. And both of those men provide many roller coaster moments.
Yeah, and I can imagine as well that they can, just because there's so much you're going through, so many different eras in life, and also I guess you can kind of tell by art and what people are into as well, like the geopolitics of the time, and just how there's like changing landscapes, like even talking about New York in a certain time period and how cheap it was to say sometime like now made me laugh quite a lot.
Yeah, I think a big challenge of making, especially archival documentaries like this largely is putting the viewer into that place and time. and establishing that feeling. That's always a big challenge, I think.
And would you go about with something challenge like that? Because it's so big, trying to get audience members like into that world, but then also for them to understand like this is not the same world that you're living in now. Things were so different, and it's such a different time. And I guess at the same time as well, it's like, we didn't have stuff like cell phones or the internet. We kind of all just lived completely different sort of lives.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I chose to like show the grittiness of New York at the time. And, so visually we're experiencing, parts of New York that you just don't see anymore at that time. We talk about, living cheaply on Madison Avenue, and, Chevy living in an apartment with cockroaches running everywhere, and then them saying it was a wonderful time and we felt like we owned New York City. It's just that's not something he would say now as an 80-year-old man. That is something very much in the moment, of the early 70s.
And yeah, it's just funny to hear and see, because as he said, like, I don't think anybody would say that now. I don't think people would have as much fun with, well, they probably do have fun, but just like a different kind of fun as well.
Yeah. And the Rod Stewart period music doesn't hurt either, to help establish that time and place as well.
Yeah, 100%. What I'm curious to know about is how you work in terms of organizing the interviews and archival footage. Now, I'm not sure how long Marina must have spent with Chevy, but I can imagine that there would be a number of takes, and there's also a lot of jumping around between the stories and what is being said, and the conversations that are had. How do you organize and sort of mark what you need, or not what you need, but what you think will be important and what you'll use later on? Do you go by sort of time period and project by project and try be as linear with a timeline as possible, or is it something that you go by what might pique your interest in and exploring more by looking at other other interviewees' footage?
That's a great question. For a film, and once again, every film is different, right? But for films like this, the Chevy Chase film, that is very much interview-driven film, I go through certainly the main interviews first, and Chevy is the main interview here. Marina had shot the first interview with Chevy before I started, so I had that one at my fingertips. I went through that one, and I let the subject kind of tell the story as much as possible. And I just, by going through the interviews, I pick out little scenes that they're talking about, things that can be scenes, things that can help set up scenes. I look for what I call tentpole scenes, a lot. And if I can come out of like our main subject interview or a series of interviews with, say, 5 tentpole scenes, I feel like I'm in pretty good shape. I can start building those scenes without worrying about where am I going to start, where am I going to end. I'm just going to build this scene. I know I have a beginning, middle, and end to this moment in this person's life right here. I'm going to build that, and I just start building that way. And slowly but surely things start to reveal themselves, I didn't know where I was going to start with this film. Obviously the obvious thing, I think when I did a string out, I did certain string outs, without worrying about the film structure just yet. And obviously the first thing I did was just a linear string out, starting with childhood and working my way to current day. I felt pretty early on that the childhood stuff, especially what we learn about the abuse in his childhood, would play as an excuse for his current day behavior if it were put up front. And I didn't want that. I wanted us to experience Chevy the way that we know him and the stories that we've heard about, and experience some of those stories and push that childhood stuff back as far toward the end as I could. And that way it wouldn't feel like an excuse. It would feel like, it explains things without being an excuse. And I think, that's ultimately what I was able to do. And luckily, Marina was totally on board with that idea, and CNN studio was on board with the idea, and everybody went with it. So, and I think that it does accomplish that.
I think as well, like it, as you said, it could give you Chevy a way out to explain why
Right.
Somebody's behavior is like that, and it's interesting sort of the breakdown of how you'll play with, like, we'll introduce him as we know him, and then once we start peeling back the layers and layers, then like people kind of understand a bit more about him, his life, and how he was growing up. It is probably quite easy to make that excuse as well, use it as an opening and be like, oh, I don't want to say poor me, because that sounds very bad, because it's obviously horrible what's happened, but it's also, he can't then just gloss over the fact of everything that came afterwards.
Yeah, where you can certainly envision how the film would play if we'd opened with that, opened with the childhood and the child abuse and all that, versus how we open with the film of people saying Chevy's got this reputation of being an asshole. Is he an asshole? Is he not an asshole? And Chevy telling us, you're not smart enough to figure me out. Quite different starting points.
And then do you feel as well, like when you have those sort of starting points, you kind of use it as like a joke, not as a joke, but as in it'll be like structured as a joke, where you have the, not punchline, but you have the setup and then you have the punchline afterwards with your storytelling?
I'm sorry, like I'm not following the question. Like, can you
I
say?
guess it's probably more of a statement, more of the fact that like it's kind of structuring it as a joke, that you have the setup and then you have the punchline afterwards, with it sort of following through with it all.
Well,
I think
I can mention here is, like, when Marina did that first interview with Chevy, and I had it to watch. She told me before I watched it, I don't think we got great stuff with him here, but I don't think it's a great interview, but take a look at it and see what you thought. And it was that very first interview where he says to her straight up, I think that you're not smart enough to figure me out. And there was a lot of little moments like that where a lot of the bantering back and forth with her was in that first interview. And I said to her, I talked to her right after watching it. I said, "Oh, there's some great stuff in here, and I think there's some real gold in here, And I love the moments where the two of you are really sort of bantering back and forth, and I think that really helps bring the film alive as well. She becomes kind of a character in the film for the way that she banters with him.
yes, and I think as well, like it helps because then as an audience we have what's it called? I feel like you kind of have another way into the doc, and you kind of, most of the time, you don't really hear the director when they ask the questions, because it feels like they get edited out. But it's also, you get that sort of more of a human approach, should we say? Over it all.
Yeah, that's exactly why I liked it. It was this. It was a real conversation between two people, and it's a real exploration as well. And so there's plenty of films where I don't want to use the director's voice at all in my docs, and then there's plenty of times where I do want to use it, because it does become part of the storytelling.
Yeah, and I guess as well, as you said, you've already kind of established that banter, and it's like you have given a voice to the story itself, how can you then push it on? And I think as well that like that's just part of the documentary side of things as well, that how are you going to present something like this? How do we not, maybe for the lack of a better term, make it too samey or just a bit too, paint by numbers?
Yeah.
And that's probably something that can be done quite easily as well.
Yeah, my first cuts are usually pretty paint by numbersy, and a little difficult to watch, and they're flat, and then I start really looking for the roller coaster, for the highs and the lows, and how to mix things up, and you start to really discover, this is a great scene, but is this scene really helping the film? And when you start pulling those great scenes out that don't really help the film, it starts to sing, and you're writing it, you're writing the film, it's evolving, you're evolving with it, and you're changing how you see it, and that's when things really start to become magical.
And even if it's something like, as you mentioned now, that like it is something that is paint by numbers, but I guess it's like such a great blueprint to go by, because then you're just looking at what you have and how can you play on things, and actually could we play with time a bit differently, or structure, or even what what else could become from the interviews.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm remembering now, like the first stuff that I actually cut for the film. I went through the interviews and I identified my tent poles, the big scenes I wanted to do. But then we had what I call verite, all the footage of Chevy at home and in his current day environment. So I just cut all of the verite scenes, once again, without worrying about how they were going to fit in the film or not, and just looking for little moments. And I would try, you can shape a verite scene in a number of different ways usually, so sometimes I would take the same scene and I would shape it 3 or 4 different ways. I would make it very sentimental, or I would make it very dark, or I would make it just more informational, and I had those in my toolbox to sort of plug and play, where as I started putting together the structure of the film, I had these verite scenes that I could pop out to and give the archival moments some relief, because if you get stuck in archival land too much in a documentary, it can feel like you're painting by numbers, as you say. I call it flattening out. So those moments became so critical to breaking us out of the paint by numbers kind of feel.
I can imagine as well, at times it can be, when you're working on it, it can be a bit, I don't want to say you could get bored, but if you're doing it as like paint by numbers, you can kind of maybe get slightly frustrated with what you're looking at and how you want to sort of shape the story. When you do hit that sort of wall, as an editor, what do you do to revigorate yourself creatively? Do you step away from what you're doing and then sort of make notes about, like, okay, maybe if we change X here and move something over here, then we can make it a bit more engaging and interesting for the audience?
When I get stuck, I usually move to a different scene. And if I'm stuck on a scene that is of a certain nature, I will move to a scene that feels completely opposite of the nature of that scene. And hopefully that will sort of break me out of the block that I'm having, with it. It often does. Sometimes it doesn't. So I need to take a long walk, and I need to just clear my head. I need to watch a film that has a completely different, subject or style than what I'm working on, and sometimes, I need to take a shower, whatever you do to like get your brain into, the different hemisphere, is a great technique for sure.
Okay. Yeah, again, it's interesting to hear each, like when I talk to people, like their different
Processes
processes. Yes, thank you.
and
Yeah.
techniques, and yeah, I mean, it took me a number of years of working as an editor to feel okay with that, feel okay to like, what, the most productive thing I can do right now is take an hour-long walk and just clear my head, because if you have that, like that work ethic where you've got to be sitting at the desk for 10 hours a day and, just power through it, it's hard for you to let go of that, and it's hard to feel good about taking a walk and clearing your head, if you're feeling like, they demand that I'm at the desk right now. But some of the great directors I've worked with, we would say, let's take a walk, and we could talk about anything other than the film, and that just would free us up, to go back and sit at the desk and then find a new path.
And I guess as well, it's like it's always a little moment to be like looking out somewhere and then like actually it will click, and you kind of like, I either need to write this down or I need to run back to my computer and have a look and make sure that I can I've got this correct and it's gonna click into place.
Yeah. I mentioned earlier about, my partner in life, Poppy Das, who is also a documentary film editor. We often both work here at home on the same site. We're often working on different projects. And if either one of us gets stuck, we say, hey, can you come take a look at this and tell me honestly, is this any good? Is this terrible? Is it working at all? And that's like, the two of us are incredibly lucky to have that situation.
I think as well as like that, somebody's gonna be brutally honest, and you don't have you'll have a choice about it, and you won't be like, promise you won't get upset. It's like, it's gonna be bad. It's gonna be bad.
Yeah, she has no problem being brutally honest about my work, which is great.
Yeah, 100%.
One thing I find is really interesting too is that, and I've tried to break myself of this, but it's hard, But as an editor, especially doing documentaries, trying to make a scene is like being presented with a math problem or some type of solution that you have to solve, a problem that you have to solve, and then you make a scene out of it and you think in your mind, I solved that. I made that work. It has a beginning, middle, and end, problem solved. I'm moving on. But when you can step back and really see it for what it is, maybe you didn't fully solve it in the way that it needed to be solved, and so that's why it's always so valuable to get fresh eyes onto your work as well, no matter what type of film you're editing.
Yes, and in terms of the world, like you have people who have a different perspective, and that's like the great thing about art. It is like the different perspectives and answers you get from people watching things and taking things in, and especially if somebody's already experienced in editing and documentary film editing, they are going to be. I feel like they'll probably be a lot more aware of like what you're trying to go for and probably communicate with you as well.
Yeah, for sure. The Chevy Chase film was a really short schedule. It's probably the shortest schedule I've ever done a feature doc under, and so we all knew that going in, and we all had to it was a very small crew that we had, but we all had to just fully trust each other to do the work that needed to be done when it needed to be done, because we did not have time for a lot of experimentation, a lot of digesting, as I like to call it. We had to get results pretty quickly.
And when you are on such a tight schedule, how do you then create the workflow on what you're doing, and how do you stay on top of it so it doesn't snowball into something like a complete, snowball out of control?
Yeah, I keep a calendar. You can probably see a calendar behind me right now. I've just started a new film this week, and I've got the whole year laid out. And just like my tent poles that I look for when I go through an interview, I put tent poles on the calendar. I have to be here by this date. I have to be down here by this date. And I find that measuring backward is just as informative as measuring forward. Meaning I know how long it took me to get to this point, by measuring backwards. All right, I can definitely get to this next point in half of that time, so that's a big part of it. Keeping your project organized is crucial. So I always rely on my AEs to keep me very organized as far as what footage is coming in, what I need. I always have a workflow of what is in request, what is coming in, what is already in, so that it's very easy to stay on top of that. On Chevy, because it was such a short schedule, I worked with Monika Austin, who's an associate editor on this. And so she's someone who used to be an assistant editor of mine, and we elevated to her being an associate editor on this. And she started, I think 3 or 4 weeks before me, just like doing first passes on certain scenes. That was a big help. And so she kept on top of all that workflow. Like once I carded out the film, I do try to like card out a structure pretty early on. It doesn't always end up being the final structure of the film, but once I get cards on a board, then it becomes easy to be like, all right, you do this, this, and this, I'll do this, this, and this, and and we'll have something to aim for.
That's the sort of way I'd work as well, just because I need to sort of visually see, as you said, work backwards from where you need to be to where you are now.
Yeah.
Especially when you're on a tight schedule, because it's like every moment is probably quite precious, and important as well. What I would like to sort of go back to is the documentary as well, is linking the stories of what Chevy says to what other interviewees say. I can imagine, because there are certain people that are being interviewed, that they'll have a certain cachet about them, and that there's something really important that your arms are a bit twisted, that you need to have them in there because of the star power, or if they're a relative, for example, as well. How do you go about balancing what the interviewees say to what Chevy says in telling his story?
I just look for what's the truth. Obviously, two people observe an event, you're going to have two versions of the truth. But so there's always personal truth, and then there's a sort of absolute truth of the facts. With a film like this, it's all personal truths, as to like, how did you experience Chevy? So when we're dealing with a scene, say the scene about the film Modern Problems, we have 3 different people commenting on that, really 4 different people commenting on that particular film, and it's 4 different points of view, really, as to what happened. Did he actually get electrocuted? Did he not get electrocuted? Was he doing like way too much coke? Was he not doing enough coke? Was the script in good enough shape to start filming, or was it a horrible mess? So I just try to like have everybody tell their point of view from that scene, and hopefully it adds up to a complete picture.
Yes, and I think as well as like getting a fine line dance of like what could be said is important, what could be said as like a joke, but then how can we I guess you can kind of play with like people's memories a little bit as well. And I know
Yeah,
it feels like a bit of a cheat, but then
yeah,
also because, well, not cheat, but I feel like it's more like, I don't know, the best way to say it's like Inception in terms of like you're going into somebody's mind and then sort of playing around with it. Because then as an audience members, it's like, well, what is the truth? What's not the truth? How can they be playing on memory so much as well?
yeah. And there's also a sort of technique that I like to use a lot. It's a kind of a sports terminology about, the play-by-play announcer versus the color announcer, right? So the play-by-play announcer tells you exactly what's happening on the field at the time, and the color announcer gives you interesting facts that help color what a play that just happened. And so with a film like this, your main subject is usually the play-by-play announcer, and your ancillary characters are the color announcers, if that makes sense.
Yes, I'm slightly lost because it's also certain sports terms get lost on me, but that's not. That's
Yeah,
also just because it's like different sports and different sort of ways that they're presented. But I understand the sort of analogy of sort of seeing it in different ways and understanding it as well. Um, and I think as well as like an editor, you can kind of have fun with it. But then also if they say something, you can highlight that bit and then they come back to it, I don't know, 20 minutes later when they're talking about something else, and then they bring it up again.
yeah. I mean, that's what makes things poignant and make you really. I mean, there's that old thing about where you end a scene is more important than where you start in a lot of ways, because that's what you want. That's what the audience will absorb, is your final thought there. So, I love being able to like demonstrate something early on in a film and then have it come back in a way and have you see that thing with a different perspective. I think that those kind of moments are really powerful.
Yes, and I think as well, like when you have something like that, it's like people could be a lot more reflective or even give a different answer, or actually something will click in their mind where they think, actually, maybe I'll go back to that point and make it highlight it in in what I want to say, or actually I'm trying to prove a point by saying this part as well.
Yeah, yeah. And Chevy is not generally a very introspective person and not a very philosophical person in a certain way, in the way that, I mean, like, I don't think he examines a lot of his actions and feelings a lot. I think he's in the moment a lot of the time, and he's just like, he's always thinking of the next joke and stuff too. And so a lot of these other interview subjects that we use are the ones who can give us some introspection on him and the way that they know him, like the producer Alan Greisman, who worked with him on Modern Problems and Fletch and stuff, talks about, I don't, is he an asshole because of this? Is it because of old age? Is it because the business has passed him by? And is he even aware that he's doing it? And his take was that he's not even aware that he's being an asshole a lot of the time. And Alan Zweibel, the great Saturday Night Live writer, talks about, in the younger days, Chevy would sort of put people down, but they'd be in on the joke. It was with a little wink and stuff. And as he got older, that wink kind of disappeared, and it wasn't so much of a prank and a joke. It became more mean spirited. That's the kind of insight you're not going to get from the subject matter, the subject.
Yes, and I think as well, like again, it's just like when you ask your partner to look at work, it's like they'll give you an honest answer and they'll give it honest feedback as well. And yeah, it's hard because even when they say about like the weekend joke thing, I feel like there's must be something that's just lost as a generational thing, because I do, maybe it just doesn't happen as often now where people joke about things or say certain things, or maybe we're just more aware of actually that's not cool to say.
Yeah.
Don't
Yeah.
say it.
Well, look at that first season of Saturday Night Live, just the Richard Pryor scene, you're not going to, you cannot do that scene now. You couldn't do that scene 20 years ago. I'm not even sure you could really do it in 1975, but they did it.
Yeah, and they somehow sort of got away with it. Unless somebody probably maybe just in their mind were just like, do you know what? I didn't see that. Let's just move on, and hopefully no one says anything.
Right. That I really struggled with that scene a lot, and I did a million different versions of that and a million different lengths of that scene. And for the longest time, I just dropped out the N-word completely. But then I thought the way that it comes back in the community scene, I felt like it was important that I had to I had to play it without bleeping the word there in the beginning, because of the power that it has in that community scene later on.
When you have something like that as well, because it's such a sensitive thing, where it can offend people, and it does offend people. How do you go about with that as an editor, towing the line of making those decisions and thinking how sensitive and insensitive you can be with it all?
One of the earliest notes that CNN gave us was that look, Chevy makes no excuses. He says, I don't give a fuck all the time. That's constantly saying, I don't give a fuck what people think. I don't care. This is me. This is what I do. And they were saying basically that we were being too soft with him. We were protecting him a little too much, and so once they said that, I think it's true. I think that so much of Chevy's personality is him saying, I don't give a fuck. I don't think that it's entirely true that he doesn't give a fuck, but that's what he's constantly saying all the time, So once we sort of removed the shackles of that, it was like that's a bit that he still loves to this day. I mean, Jay Chandrasekhar, the director of Community, tells us how he would come in and talk about that particular scene, on certain mornings on the set of Community, and that's like a very iconic scene from that season. So I think you have to just let it play the way it really was, and it is. Once again, we talk about how do you establish time and place. Well, that scene establishes a time and a place, that you're not going to see nowadays.
Yeah, and that's a fair point as well. And with that as well, and I don't know, it's just interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it's fascinating. I watched an Eddie Murphy stand-up film. I can't remember which one it was, and I was cringing through so much of it because it was from the mid '80s, I want to say, and there's so much material in there that you just could not say now, and you wouldn't say it now and hear it, but it was totally acceptable in the mid '80s,
Yeah. Again, interesting how times change, and having that retrospective of what we're doing and how, I don't want to say get away with things, but how they pushed the boundaries and pushed the limit of what they could do.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's like that with all forms of art, music, fine art, everything. Times change, and what you can do and what is what you can get away with, it changes every decade for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Just to wrap up this episode, what was your favorite segment to edit?
Oh, gosh, so many of them with this. I think like I said, like the verite scenes were probably my favorite. It just, I really liked seeing him interact with his friend Patrick and with the fans. I love seeing, I was really amazed at how much his fans love him. They just love him when he goes to these events and does these screenings, and when he's just out in public, and people constantly coming up to him and quoting from all his different films and stuff, and how genuine he is with the fans. I think he really does love his fans. So that stuff was pretty fun to cut. Yeah.
I think it also gives you another perspective of, like, even if it is, even if those so many years have gone past, that there's still so many fans and people still adore him and still quote films, and how timeless some of those films are as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, like, a big part of the focus for me for the film was going to be, there's the fans who love him and think that he never was an asshole, and then there's the people who never were really fans, who know him from a professional perspective and think he's a total asshole. I wanted the people who think he was an asshole to watch the film and say, okay, maybe there's some good sides to Chevy. And then I wanted the people who watched him and just thought, he's a saint and everything, say, okay, maybe there are some bad sides to Chevy too. We all are complicated people, and Chevy certainly takes those to new heights.
Yeah, exactly. Greg, thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, thank you. This is a fun conversation.
I'm Chevy Chase, and you're not streaming now. Go out and watch Greg and everybody's incredible work. Thank you again.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
You take care, and bye-bye.
Thanks, Rob. Bye.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast.